So we've already quickly had a quick introductory discussion back in the VIP area. Jörg, would you just mind starting out telling me a little bit more about yourself and what your personal background is in terms of level design and design? I remember I briefly saw that you have built up quite a career in level design. So how did that start? How did that come to pass?
Well, I'm born in 1976, to start at the beginning, and I'm a child of the 80s, and I grew up with the early video games, with like the Atari 2600 and the C64. And as soon as I had my first C64 when I was like 8 or 9, I also got into programming a little bit back then. I loved video games, and I loved the idea of making my own. So I started designing them, not very successful. I never finished anything, but I started a lot, and that was quite the passion. I loved that. And then, well, I grew up, and then I did some other things in between, and I almost forgot about it, but until in the 90s, I found out about level editors and that you actually can modify existing games, and that seemed like a burden or a boundary that was like way lower and something you could really do, and I could do with my skill set. And so I started doing that. I started doing campaigns for the first StarCraft game, or Half-Life 1, or then later for Neverwinter Nights a lot, and I published these mods. And to give you the complete picture, after school, I had two passions. One is video games, and the other one back then was traveling. And so I had to decide for one or the other, and I thought making video games seems to be really hard. So I went into tourism, and I started working at the airport. And I also traveled the world a lot, but I also started selling people the idea of a different place, which is somehow very close to what video games actually do, or what we as designers actually do. We imagine a place that we sometimes have never been or that doesn't exist, and we spark this idea or this dream into the minds of our users, right? That's what we do. So after I worked at the airport in Frankfurt for quite a while, 7-8 years, and then eventually got bored and was in the meantime always building. Was always building levels in the meantime, and at one point thought, hey, how about I make this a career? And that's what I did.
So what was your first big break? When you decided that, following that, what was your first big break? How did you get yourself into the industry?
I went to Berlin and went to a school called Games Academy.
Hey, any Games Academy people in the house?
That was like,
there we go.
That was like 2003. So like 12 years ago, and I learned programming. I did the programming course there because I thought that's something I really can't do. Like level design, I felt pretty. Yeah, I thought like I can do that already. So I did that for 2 years, and then got my first internship in a studio near Strasbourg, and then I was at a couple of different studios, and then 7 years ago I ended up at YAGER. And that was 2007, when YAGER just started working on a pitch for a third-person shooter. Back then, it was still a third-person shooter based in a science fiction scenario. So it was like a dark, mature future, and a little bit like Gears of War. That was before Gears of War came out. And that from that game, eventually, what evolved from there was Spec Ops: The Line. So I worked on Spec Ops from the very, very early beginning, like starting like even when we started picking the setting, going to Dubai, until we finally shipped that baby.
You've been to Dubai yourself?
Yes, I've been there. We sent a couple of people from the team. That's something we like to do at YAGER. Is actually we want to,
right?
Yes, we want to know our shit and do proper research and send people to the places that we. If it is a real place, right, then that's what you should do. You should send them over.
Most definitely.
So, for example, I mean, Dead Island 2 right now is going to take place in California. So we sent quite a number of people over to California. We have like this one artist we sent over he's really his specialty is trees and rocks. So and he started doing something, and at the beginning I thought like that's crazy. That sounds like why would you ever do that? I mean, there's like texture libraries and everything. But he said like no, that's not the real thing. You need to go there and you need to scan actual trees and rocks, and that's what he did. So he went over to California and stayed there for 3 weeks and came back with a massive libraries of rocks and trees. So he scanned them by like moving around them, taking lots of pictures until you actually could model the thing close to the actual piece in the environment.
One of the things that that captivated me, also being a fan of Spec Ops and your work on that, was an article that one of the narrative designers at YAGER, Richard Percy, wrote back in 2012. And I love how he deconstructed the narrative design and how you guys implemented location into, the narrative strongly, which kind of, I guess, would explain why that artist is very, very adamant about his rocks and trees. And of course, it's interesting to see how you guys, in the shooter genre, challenged and subverted player expectations of what they were, supposed to experience. And now, of course, we're in a situation where we suddenly are looking at, the zombie action game genre, which has, now become incredibly popular with games like DayZ out there, but also, of course, properties like The Walking Dead. Who, all of them on their own, including what Telltale's take was on The Walking Dead, have tried to do the same. And now you guys are in a position where you have all of these games who have already tried to, do the unexpected with zombie games. Now you have the challenge of doing that even more. How would you say has the legacy of what you guys have learned and experienced through Spec Ops: The Line influenced how you guys look at all of those other media that have now tried to subvert and challenge people's expectations of zombies and zombie games?
Well, genres are a great thing. Genres are, if we talk about the tool set of communication, they are like the screwdrivers and hammers in that tool set. They're awesome.
Yeah.
If you use a genre, like something like zombies, you don't need to explain a lot of things anymore. It's a set thing, right? They are after you, they want to eat you, they're stupid, you need to shoot them in the head, and all these things are set. And that's similar to the military genre or the shooter. It's basically if you make a game and the people have the player you're playing has a military rank and he's there with other soldiers and there are other soldiers shooting at him and you give him a gun, it's a clear set and people have certain expectations. So that's an advantage because it allows you to dive into something more right away. So when we got the opportunity to work on Dead Island, the first thing, and that was basically we just coming out of Spec Ops, and everybody was in the mindset of, we just did Spec Ops. We need to do basically, people expect us to do the same thing again. It needs to be dark and mature and sad and depressing and whatnot. And everybody was also watching Walking Dead at that time. So that was like, that is a given. So without telling too much, but what we try to do is basically we took that setting and said like, okay, but how can we twist it? How can we turn it around? How can we again? Because I think that's for me what I take from Spec Ops. It's not that YAGER is the studio that's always going to do really sad and very single-player centric stories. It's about doing something new to something that seems well established, and that's what we're heading out to do with Dead Island as well. Especially when it comes, I can say that much, with the setting, right, and the mood and the tone. We looked at the first game, for example, and we really liked it. That was the other thing that was great to get the opportunity to work on it. We played it a lot in the company, actually in multiplayer and in co-op, and we looked at it like, hey, that's an awesome game. But
I very much enjoyed it myself because
yeah.
you know I'm a huge Diablo fan, and the fact that they took a lot of inspiration from how people experienced the team play in that,
yeah.
you know, really grabbed my
yes.
attention.
But there's something you know, like if you look at what they do there with the mood and the tone, because that is very, very out of the box zombie fiction, right? It's basically, oh my God, it's an outbreak. Everybody tries to escape, and the military is going to nuke the island soon. So that's, you know, that's your tool set right there.
There's a bit of escape from
Exactly.
LA in there too, yeah.
But when you look at what the
New York, yeah,
what the experience is of the players in the game, especially when we played it together, it's basically, oh, I have the flaming machete of doom, and I'm gonna kill this slobber, and then I get like more loot out of this, and it's like there's a huge narrative dissonance, if you want, if I may quote this, in between the gameplay and the story, right? So there's disconnect, and that's something we want to solve.
How much? What kind of like prep work have you guys done? You know, what kind of like research have you guys dove into in terms of you know, preparing for your eventual work on Dead Island 2 in terms of, you know, comic books, movies? You've mentioned you've been to California to explore the location. What else has kind of come out of your research? Specific findings where you were like, well, we're definitely not going to do that. Like suddenly become super soapy, like season 5 of The Walking Dead. In my personal opinion, I don't know what everyone else thinks, but
I mean, we of course watched Walking Dead, and we watched. It feels like every zombie movie on the planet in the company, and looked at it and analyzed it and thought like, what's cool, what's fitting for us and what isn't. And I can promise you as much that as we're definitely not going to do Walking Dead, because also it's something that almost every second studio that's doing a zombie game right now is actually trying to do Walking Dead. So we're doing something really, really different, because zombie movies have a wide range. If you look at Romero and where he's coming from, yes, they were sad and they were dark and there were grim moments. However, they always had a sense of comedy as well, mixed with that. And that's something I personally find very interesting. And working on Dead Island 2 gives us the opportunity to play with this.
Now, you know, we are also talking about, we've also covered the topic of course, narratives in games and how that's been evolving in the future, you know, in today and in the future. And you know, as you mentioned to me briefly when we spoke before this talk, you know, I agree with you when you mentioned that we are kind of still, you know, just scratching the surface in terms of traditional tools that we still implement. You know, where do you see this going, and what kind of tools do you believe that we should start looking into more or try to experiment more in order to, you know, push the envelope?
Yeah, I mean, it's, as you say, we're just scratching the surface. When you compare us to movies and to any passive media that's out there, they have like so much more experience than we do. They have a defined set of how they do certain things, and they have a whole vocabulary that's very clear and for every director to use, and they can talk with their actors and their camera people, and they know exactly what they mean. And the tools, for example, how to create certain emotions in movies is very well set and very well explored. And games are far from that. We're just starting out. Spec Ops was an exciting opportunity to work on this, and also I hope to push the boundaries a little bit by dipping into space where we actually tried to tell a tragedy and tried to cause negative emotions in the player while playing, which was very controversial at that point. What I find interesting in the industry right now, or the tendencies I see right there, because I think telling linear stories, similar to a passive medium, we're there. We know how to do that now. We have cutscenes established, and we have all the tools that work there. However, where we're just starting at is the opportunities what games really can do, which is creating a different experience each time you play it. So
replayability.
Yes, replayability by using procedural content, for example. So like, I don't know if have you played Shadow of Mordor? Like their Nemesis system, that's something that goes along the line, right? You get enemies that you meet during the game that are procedural content that remember that you killed them. And you start building a personal relationship with them, not because a writer sat down and wrote that beforehand. No, it's happening by events in the game that are player triggered, but they are not preset, they are not predefined. And this is something I find incredibly interesting. It's not entirely new, sure. I mean, there's like games like the classic roguelikes. They do that on a very low level when it comes to narrative, but they have been doing this for, I think, 30 years now. But I sense that it's finally reached a point where actually also the big studios that avoided risk, this kind of risk for a long time, started digging into that. Like Shadow of Mordor would be one example.
And in terms of you having a level design background, I'm not sure if we have any. Do we have any level designers in the audience? Any game designers in the audience? Okay.
Some.
So that's maybe you'll end up doing a little bit of level design. But I was curious, what is your take on how level design has been evolving over the time? Obviously, with Spec Ops, with the line, you guys made sure that narrative and environments and locations were very closely tied together. How do you see that evolving from here on, and how is your team, aiming to take that to the next step with Jaeger games in general?
Spec Ops was a very expensive game in a way. And I'm not talking about budget now and numbers, but basically the way we did certain things, because every moment and every situation was really handcrafted, and every moment in the game was basically one shot. Because if it was a journey that only moved forward, you started at the outside of Dubai and you moved towards Conrad's Tower, and you always went down this what's our river of darkness, the Sheikh Al Seed Road, towards that huge tower, and you go through these different settings, and they're all handcrafted and fiddled together, and they're all one-shot content. So basically, you walk through that once and then it's done, and that is something that you can do for a game of the length of Spec Ops, but it's going to kill you if you try to build a world like this, right? I mean, Spec Ops is, let's look at it, it sometimes feels, it feels open, but it's basically one corridor that you follow down until you reach the end of the game. And if you look at most games right now, and that's what people really want, is they want a world. They don't want one corridor to move down. They want a world they can experiment with. Like GTA 5 just came out for PC, and people love that, and rightly so. So for level design, that means there will still be occasions where you are asked to create a certain set piece and make that exact set piece work. Like look at the player perspective. Where do you want to go if you're here? What are the possibilities you see? What are the actions that you're offering here? And craft one unique piece, but I think the next level for a level designer, so to speak, would be to learn how does the world work? What kind of things belong together? Look at, I don't know, look at this. This is a cinema, right? So what does a cinema need? What fits into it? What options do I have if I go into the cinema? I need the cashier, I need the bar where I can buy popcorn, and these kind of things, and understand the patterns and the necessities to make a location believable, but also to understand how to repeat it.
Glenn Schofield had his keynote yesterday, and he kind of said a similar thing. I'm not sure if any of you attended his. Who was at Glenn Schofield's talk? Oh, you guys missed out. Well, luckily everything's being recorded. And he spoke very adamantly about the importance of the idea, the initial idea that kind of begins the creation process, and how every item, every object in an environment has a story. What's the story of this tire? And he told this amazing story about how he looked over, how he went up to one of his artists who was designing tires, and he made a brand new tire, and he asked the artist, "What's the story of the tire? Is this a tire that's in the store?" That's for sale, because if it's outside, then most likely it's covered in mud and it's scratched, and of course the artist blew his mind and was like, "Oh crap, I need to do it like that." How have you guys taken that approach inside your team in terms of combining, on one side that strong narrative that we just discussed. But on the other side, of course, what you just mentioned, making sure that these assets, these things become reapplicable and more useful, and in the terms that you've described, cheaper for the development, because you get to reuse them and you get to repurpose them in more than just spotting them once or having that one-time experience in a corridor.
Yeah, I mean, one way is exactly looking at stuff in context and seeing, okay, how can we build something that can be modified rather easily? Like if you look at a car that is on the street, it can be the same car, but if you put it on in an area that has been hit by a sandstorm, it's going to be covered in sand, and you're going to remove the tires. That's a rather quick and easy way of doing that. And the other thing is exactly that you actually, and that's. It doesn't matter if you handcraft it or if you use presets for it. It's you need to think about what's the logic of this space, what's the logic of this location, where does it come from, what happened here, what will happen once the player was here, and if you consider all these things and like your let's say your tool set will sometimes dictate what you actually can do. But that's fine because limitation is good for creativity in my mind.
Indeed, yeah.
Then you will build a lovely place that people believe could exist.
Now, the whole experience that you have, of course, been through at YAGER, I'm sure, has set certain standards for you as a designer and with your background in level design, and now as a design director. What would you say to the next generation of aspiring game developers here that are the kind of standards they should want to aspire to be able to master in terms of understanding design, understanding level design, in order to be able to make those experiences that people want to play nowadays, and the kind of experience that you guys make, or even have an opportunity of joining you guys, since I think YAGER is hiring a couple of people or two.
It's down in the hallway.
Down the hallway.
Meet our lovely ladies from HR.
Quick pitch.
Yes.
But what would you say are kind of like the requirements for young talent to be able to enter a team like yours, who has been through that process just now and is going through that process now with Dead Island 2? What's kind of like the mentality that they need?
Something that I'm personally looking at always when I'm looking at CVs or actually at applications is actual achievements. And for a designer, or like actually for our game developer, usually that means something that I can play. Given I'm not an artist, right? So I'm not looking at concept art and so on. That's someone else. But if I want to see if someone is a good designer, then give me a game that you've made.
So that comes actually back to a point, because like when you started out, you quickly realized the value of actually being able to program yourself next to your design passions.
Yes.
So I'm guessing that's also something that you have as it would help.
Yes,
I guess,
it
right?
definitely does. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, be able to do something, right? I mean, now we are at a time where the tool sets have become so powerful. I mean, and the documentation has become so well. So everybody, in my mind, everybody who wants to and takes a little bit of time can build a game. And yes, it will not be the next Assassin's Creed. It will not be a 10 years, 10,000 people high-level production. But if you want to prove your creativity and you want to prove that you actually understand what it takes to build a game, build one. That's what I would give everybody, because that's really, that's the second thing is creativity comes from creating. Don't wait for the big awesome idea that's gonna come from the sky and hit you like lightning. It's, I don't know, never happened to me. Might happen to other people, never happened to me. What I always seen is actually you get creative while you create. So start something, start building something, plan ahead, that's fine, but don't wait, don't sit there and be stunned and wait for the great thing that hits you, because that's not how games are made. I can tell you.
I had a personal question for you. When you mentioned how you first heard of the concept back in 2007, and then eventually got very closely involved in the production of Spec Ops. What would you say was the biggest challenge that you set for yourself working on that project, and how was it? How did you manage to achieve it or get close to achieving your personal goals? So what were those, and how did you manage to achieve them?
I have a very like detailed one, if that's okay. So there's like
Please do.
we had a like so after we got our first greenlit for Spec Ops. I mean that usually happens in different states, right? So basically the publisher is like, yeah, that's an interesting pitch. Now build us something that proves how the game going to look like later and so on before they sign for a 3 years construct. So one of the first things we built was some kind of demo, which was very, very staged, and it wasn't really free playable, but you could walk through it, and it was very different. It was very close already in feel to the final game later. Like, and it was actually the section, if you remember Spec Ops very early, where the sandstorm hits the first time, and then the Walker and his squad fall down through a glass roof, which they didn't realize that they were standing on the roof of a building, and they get attacked, and then they fall down and fall into this beneath in this building that was there all the time under them. And so we had this sequence where basically we're in that demo, because it was a piloted demo, where Walker needed to take cover and then grab for his cover, and then he was falling down, and he was still holding, and he was shooting, and enemies were approaching. We call it the hanging and shooting sequence.
Hang and shoot.
Yes, hanging and shooting, and that was really it looked awesome and impressed everybody. But when we started out building the game, there was a bunch of designers that said back then that can't be built in a game. That can never work in a game. This sequence that can work in a staged scene, and they gave me all kinds of good reasons. Like if you stick to the design textbook and see like what would a good designer do and what are the rules and how to apply them, then they were right. They're right. You shouldn't do that because it required for it to work, because it was super expensive and it needed the right animation and so on. You needed to have the player take cover at a specific cover spot in an open area where he could take cover anywhere. And it's like, no, I think it can be done. I think it can be done. And it took forever. It was really hard, and I got like really negative feedback for a long time. And we had players that got super frustrated because they took cover at the wrong spot, and it was awful. And I was so close to actually skipping the thing, but we kept following through, and eventually we really made a path that worked so well, like in terms of like explosion here, enemy shoots from there. I mean that was the kind of game that Spec Ops was
really funneling the player
up
into the right position.
The point, and it didn't feel funneled, right? Where you actually had people like, yes, taking cover at this particular spot is the best thing I can do. It is entirely my decision. And so yes, we did that, and I was very proud. I'm very proud that this sequence is still in the game, and it worked.
Great. Well, that's one for perseverance. Do you have any other examples or any other goals that you managed to get in the bigger scope of things?
Yeah, I mean there is the whole emotional journey, and that was another thing. And I have to admit, like the whole point of making the player feel bad, which was one of the early.
The sadistic design that you guys have become known for.
Yes, the sadistic design. Yes, I like that. I never heard that before.
A journalist used that in a title, and it kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, it's all your fault, right? But that was something where I had like serious doubts in between. I mean, everybody had in the team like over the development, because basically it's so against every instinct of what a designer is supposed to do or what a developer is supposed to do. You're building good times for people, right? You're building something where they're supposed to enjoy. At the same time, there was always this nagging feeling is, hey, but movies can do it. Like there are movies, there are tragic movies, there are sad movies, there are movies that make you feel really bad when you watch them, and people still enjoy watching them. So I thought it should be possible, but it felt, for a long time, it felt like a chore, and it felt like we would never get it done. Because the issue with that was that's very hard to judge or grab before you actually have final quality, right? If you try to build an emotional sequence and you have basically
you can't get the result early in the end. You have to wait until the final.
Yes, and you have just all the assets you have is like basically gray box and T-pose and not a proper sound and developers speaking the dialogue. It's not working, right? It's not working because it's not good. It's like, give it to anyone and it's like, that's shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we stick to it, we believe to it, and
what was the turning point? Do you remember what was the exact turning point? Where you guys were like, okay, this
I
works.
think around 2000, end of 2010, 2011, when we actually had we did something like we called lots of cool production terms, final slice back then, where we said we wanna. Because we saw this problem, and our 2K saw this problem too, and everybody started to get nervous, right? That game was in development for like 2 years plus, and and basically the big hook of it was a good shooter, and all these things started to set out. It looked good and everything, but like the big hook, the USP of this game, this like telling a tragic story and making the player feel bad, there was nothing there. So so we sat together with our publisher and we said like, how can we fix this? And then we decided to like build 3 key moments of the game in really final quality, something you don't do usually because it makes your iteration process so much slower. But we felt that we had to do it, and luckily they agreed, and then we did, and then we had like 3 scenes and 3 levels that were actually very close, that looked and felt already like the final product 2 years later. And then we got lots of playtesters, both in the US and in Germany, that we invited and had played these scenes and had like really unusual interviews for game testing. Usually you do like, oh, how did you like the controls, and did you like the enemies, and 1 to 5, and this was more like, so how did you feel? What was your connection to this character, and what do you think you would have done rather, like these kind of things, and tell the story in your own words, which was like one of the most moving things we had. That's really nice. Yeah, and there we finally saw it works. It could work if we could spread this now over the rest of the game. It actually could become something really outstanding. Yeah.
Amazing.
We did.
Considering the time that we still have, I'd like to open up the time that we have for questions. I believe we have a couple of amazing volunteers on the side with microphones to help us out. So, do we have any questions from the audience? Anybody? I have one question there in the center.
Hello, just a very small question. I was just wondering why YAGER the game is not on Steam.
What?
Why YAGER the game is not buyable on Steam. I don't have an optical hard drive, so it would be great for me to buy it. There are other Xbox One games on Steam.
I agree. I honestly have no clue. I joined YAGER after YAGER, but I would assume that it might have something to do with THQ not being on Steam anymore.
And not being anymore anywhere.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But you're right. I would like to have it there
That's a good question. Yeah. There would be some money to be made if that game would still be selling, right? So yeah.
I'm gonna talk to my bosses.
Well, I guess we'll have to. Yeah, we'll have to figure that one out. Anyone else have a question about? Oh, there we go. Young gentleman over there in the back.
Hi, I would like to know how you kept up like the spirit in the studio during the long production time of Spec Ops.
Oh, that's a good question.
How did you guys stay sane?
We party hard. that helps. I mean, it's the YAGER has the most awesome team I ever worked with. It's really it's fun. It's great people. We're like right now we're 130 people from more than 20 different countries, and we all love the working there because it's a very open atmosphere. As I said, most of the people, I mean, we're not friends with everybody, but most of the people are somehow befriended among each other, and that certainly helps. Yeah, other than there were lots of parties, I really don't know. I don't know. There were not. I mean, sometimes it was a chore, right? And there were like heated discussions, and I think that's something else I can say about YAGER is it has a very open culture. So if you think if you're not happy with something, you can tell, and you're actually asked to tell. If you're happy with something, then too. So I guess that works.
You definitely have to have a safe environment and an environment of trust to be able to,
Yes.
to facilitate that kind of a level of openness and directness to your peers.
What he says.
Okay, cool,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone? No? I have a question. So, as a former level designer yourself, I just have to beg the question: what's your favorite map of all time?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not. I guess that's a typical shooter multiplayer.
No,
question.
because you mentioned you did StarCraft
Oh yeah.
campaigns as well. So
Yeah,
I know my
that's true.
StarCraft custom games.
No, I have to admit I wouldn't know. I'm sorry.
No, that's
I was-
fine.
yeah.
That's fine. Favorite sequence in Spec Ops, the most memorable one that you're the proudest of having worked on. And I hope we're not spoiling too much. Has everyone
Well,
played
too late.
Spec
Sorry,
Ops?
guys. That's over. Well, I'm. Eventually, I became a big fan of the moral decisions because they were just. I mean, at the beginning, really, I wasn't sure if we can ever pull it off. So the scenes where you actually have to decide and to let someone live or kill it, and usually these decisions were like they were never good or bad, but they were basically bad or worse. So one of the scenes that I'm really proud of because I think it really works out of the box is the scene where Rix, that's a CIA agent, who you learn is actually behind some of the terrible things that happened to Dubai. And he tries to cover up what the CIA has done there. So he actually he's out to leave the people of Dubai for dead and destroy all the water supplies. And he gets into an accident, and you know all these things. You learn that, and then he is under a burning truck, and he's still alive, and he asks you for mercy. He asks you to shoot him. And it's after an accident, so all your weapons are gone, but you have a gun with one bullet. And you don't know what's going to happen around the corner, right? So you're standing in front of this guy who is actually an asshole, right? He fucked up, but he begs for mercy. And I like that scene because it is so very, you don't need the whole setup, really. It talks to me as a human being right away. It's like you hit an animal with your car somewhere on the road, and now it's you to decide, like, do you kill it or do you leave it? Because it's going to suffer. And this is such a strong scene, and this is something where I think that only games can do, right? A movie can't do that. A movie cannot. Sophie's Choice is a great movie, but it's not your choice. It's Sophie's. And in this case, it will be, at least to a certain extent, we can make it the player's choice. And this is why I like this scene so much. Because I think for me, it's my favorite moral decision.
But I believe it also touches on a more global moral decision. I was in Finland last year, and I came across a bird that was hurt, and it was clear that half of its body was paralyzed and its feet were eaten by ants. And I was there with a friend, and he eventually decided to, I was kind of shocked. I was kind of like, oh, what am I going to do? And then he took it upon himself to twist the bird's neck and save it from. And it's a very, very classical situation that I feel a lot of people get into, but you guys put that into an interactive experience, and I got people to get close enough to that emotion as much as possible. I'm not sure if there's any other questions from the audience. Oh, someone came up with an idea. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned that creating a feeling is one of the most critical learnings for you. So could you tell us your favorite source of learning how to create feelings in a game?
So
that's a good one.
It's a good question. What's my source on how I learned how to create feelings in games or emotions in games? There's some good books. There's a book actually called Creating Emotions in Games. That's quite a good one. I read that like 10 years ago, and it's a good one. It's a good one about storytelling. But honestly, I still, and that's what I meant earlier, where we as a medium, I think, are still in the early days, because it's still a lot of gut feeling. It's still a lot of trying it out, watching your audience, giving it to your coworker. Hey, try this out. How does this work for you? Because it's like one of the toughest things to do, since, like, if it comes to, like, does the game work rule-wise, and does the balancing work, and is the shooting kind of cool or not? That's something you can do within your studio very easily. But for something like emotions, you are too attached. You made this thing, so basically you're not neutral anymore, and you will always have a very different experience than an end user. So you need really someone else, a third person, your wife, your friend, whoever, trying this thing out, and then watching these people closely and ask them. That's the best way I found.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, if we don't have any other further questions, oh, one more. Excellent. We're starting to flow.
Yeah,
that's good. That's good. So for the sake of time, we're going to have.
It's a short question.
Oh, excellent.
If you had the chance to make a sequel to The Line, would you do it or would you not?
If I had the chance to make a sequel to The Line?
Yes.
Tough question. That depends on what that sequel would be, I guess. It's hard. I think the story itself, as it is right now, that's told. So if I would, like, I have all the money, and it's not the publisher's call, it's mine entirely. I would probably do something that is similar, like a spiritual successor, rather than actually continuing the story of Captain Walker and Adams, because that story is told.
But I'm a big fan of True Detective, and I believe that that's exactly what True Detective, for example, is doing right now, right? A completely new cast, completely new environment.
Yes.
Taking that
American Horror Story is a similar thing.
Similar
yes.
thing,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah, something like that could work, right? Like having similar ingredients. But yeah, even that. I mean, personally, I'd like to do something new as well.
Totally understandable.
Yeah.
Totally understandable. So, Jörg, I'd love to thank you for your time and beautiful stories that you were able to share here, and being able to come here on such a short notice. Thank you for the audience for coming and asking some pretty amazing questions. Actually, thank you very much for that. So, yeah, without further ado, I guess we should thank you with a nice applause and.
Thank you.